The sun, a relentless golden orb, beat down on Sarah's back, a familiar warmth that did little to thaw the persistent chill of worry in her stomach. Around her, the public beach buzzed with the cacophony of summer children's laughter, the distant rumble of waves, the tinny music from portable speakers. For most, this was a carefree escape, a splash of joy in the mundane. For Sarah, it was a carefully calculated indulgence, a precious few hours snatched from a relentless schedule, a desperate attempt to give her son, Leo, a semblance of a normal childhood. Leo, all vibrant energy and boundless curiosity, was already knee-deep in the shallows, his small, sun-kissed face alight with pure, unadulterated happiness. His bright red swim trunks, a hand-me-down from a neighbor's older boy, were a stark contrast to the faded, slightly stretched fabric of Sarah's own swimsuit. She watched him, a fierce, protective love swelling in her chest, so potent it almost hurt. He was her world, her reason, her everything. And he was also the reason she worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and often ate cold leftovers for dinner. Then, crisis struck, shattering the delicate balance and forcing their worlds to collide in a way neither could have anticipated. Sarah's life was a meticulously balanced act of survival. Her mornings began before dawn, cleaning offices in the city center. Afternoons were spent at a bustling coffee shop, serving lattes and enduring endless small talk. Evenings, if she was lucky, she'd pick up a few hours of freelance data entry, her fingers flying across the keyboard long after Leo was asleep, the glow of the screen illuminating the tired lines around her eyes. Every dollar earned was meticulously accounted for, stretched thin to cover rent, utilities, Leo's school supplies, and the ever-present, terrifying possibility of an unexpected expense, a broken washing machine, a sudden medical bill. Any one of these could send their already precarious existence tumbling. It started subtly. Leo, usually a whirlwind of energy, seemed unusually quiet after school. Sarah, attuned to every shift in his mood, noticed his eyes were a little too bright, his cheeks a little too flushed. By evening, he was feverish, his small body trembling. Sarah, accustomed to battling minor childhood ailments, administered medicine and tried to keep him comfortable. Just last week, the old refrigerator had finally given up, wheezing its last cold breath. The repair bill had been a punch to the gut, forcing her to dip into the meager emergency fund she'd painstakingly built. It meant no new shoes for Leo for the upcoming school year, and even tighter budgeting for groceries. The weight of it all often felt crushing, a silent, invisible burden she carried everywhere. Yet, when Leo looked at her with his bright, trusting eyes, asking for a story or a game, she would summon a smile from somewhere deep inside, a wellspring of resilience that never seemed to run dry. But by morning, Leo was worse. His breathing was labored, a harsh, rattling sound that sent a spike of terror through Sarah's heart. His fever spiked, and he became lethargic, unresponsive. Her new job, her new car, her newfound stability, all of it faded into insignificance in the face of her son's escalating illness. This was the kind of emergency that could wipe out everything, financially and emotionally. "Mom, look," Leo shouted, pointing excitedly at a flock of seagulls swooping over the water. His voice, clear and joyful, was a balm to her weary soul. She rushed him to the emergency room, her new car a blur on the highway, her mind a frantic mess of prayers and desperate hopes. At the hospital, the doctors moved with an alarming urgency. Tests were run, hushed conversations were held. Sarah sat in the sterile waiting room, clutching Leo's favorite stuffed animal, her world shrinking to the confines of that fluorescent-lit space. Sarah smiled. "A genuine one this time? They're looking for snacks? Buddy, just like you after swimming." Hours later, a doctor, his face grim, approached her. "Ms. Miller, Leo has a severe respiratory infection. It's progressing rapidly. We're admitting him to the pediatric intensive care unit. He needs immediate, aggressive treatment." She sat on her worn beach towel, a cheap paperback novel open but unread in her lap. Her gaze rarely left Leo. The beach, despite its public nature, offered a rare sense of peace. The vastness of the ocean seemed to swallow her anxieties, if only for a few hours. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sun warm her face, imagining a life where she didn't have to worry about every single penny, where she could simply be. It was a fleeting fantasy, quickly dispelled by the sharp tang of salt air and the reality of her aching shoulders. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. PICU. Intensive care. Her vibrant, joyful Leo. Fighting for breath. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless. She felt utterly helpless, stripped bare of her strength and resilience. All her hard work, all her sacrifices, couldn't protect him from this. A sudden, piercing cry cut through the ambient beach noise, sharper and more desperate than any playful shout. Sarah's eyes snapped open. Her gaze swept the water, instantly scanning for Leo. He was still there, splashing happily in the shallow surf, oblivious. The cry came again, closer, more frantic. In a desperate, instinctive move, she pulled out her phone and dialed the only number she knew that might offer some form of help, however remote. Alexander Thorne's private number, which Eleanor had discreetly given her, in case of any follow-up questions regarding Daniel's recovery. She had never intended to use it. Her heart lurched. It was a child's cry, filled with terror. Alexander was in a high-stakes board meeting, discussing a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, when his phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. He rarely took calls during meetings, but something compelled him to glance at it. He saw the name Sarah Miller. His heart gave an uncharacteristic lurch. He excused himself, stepping out into the hushed corridor. She pushed herself up, her muscles protesting, and squinted into the shimmering distance. A small head bobbed erratically far out, beyond the designated swimming area, where the currents were known to be treacherous. A small, dark figure, clearly struggling, panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle her skin. Where were the lifeguards? The beach was crowded, but no one else seemed to have noticed. Or perhaps they hadn't registered the true urgency of the situation. "Sarah, is everything all right?" His voice was sharper than he intended, laced with immediate concern. Her maternal instincts, honed by years of hypervigilance for Leo's safety, screamed at her. That boy was in trouble, serious trouble, without a second thought, without even pausing to consider her own exhaustion or the dangers of the water. Sarah sprinted towards the waves. Her feet pounded on the hot sand, ignoring the sharp shells and pebbles. The water, initially cool, quickly became a powerful, churning force. "Alexander!" Sarah's voice was a raw whisper, choked with tears. "It's Leo. He's really sick. They've put him in the PICU. I don't know what to do." She plunged in, pushing past startled swimmers, her eyes fixed on the struggling figure. The current was stronger than she anticipated, pulling at her, trying to drag her sideways. She was a decent swimmer, but years of physical labor had taken their toll, and her energy reserves were perpetually low. Yet a surge of adrenaline, fueled by the image of Leo in similar peril, propelled her forward. Just keep going. Just reach him. The word PICU hit Alexander like a physical blow. Daniel had been in the PICU once, years ago, with a severe allergic reaction. He remembered the sterile smell, the beeping machines, the agonizing wait. He remembered the terror, the profound helplessness of watching his child suffer. All the power, all the wealth, utterly meaningless in the face of a child's illness. The boy was closer now, his small arms flailing weakly, his head barely above the surface. He was younger than Leo, perhaps 5 or 6, his face pale and contorted with fear. He was clearly caught in a rip current, a powerful channel of water pulling him away from shore. Sarah knew the danger of rip currents. She'd read the warning signs on the beach, seen the news reports. The instinct was to fight against it, but that only exhausted you faster. The trick was to swim parallel to the shore until you were out of its grip. But this boy was too small, too panicked to know that. His CEO facade crumbled instantly. The calculated distance, the carefully constructed control, it all vanished. He was no longer the billionaire titan. He was simply a father, hearing the desperate plea of another parent. She reached him, her hand grasping his small, limp arm. He was heavier than she expected, a dead weight in the churning water. His eyes were wide with terror. Then they rolled back, and he went completely still, unconscious. "Which hospital?" "Sarah," he demanded, his voice urgent, devoid of any pretense. "I'm on my way. Now." He didn't wait for her reply, already barking orders into his phone to Eleanor, his driver, and his private medical contacts. A new wave of panic, colder and more intense, washed over her. She had to get him out, now. She wrapped one arm securely around his chest, holding his head above water, and began to kick, not towards the shore, but sideways, parallel to the current, just as the signs advised. Every stroke was an effort, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming. The salt water stung her eyes, blurring her vision, but she pushed through it, her gaze fixed on the distant, receding shoreline. Within 20 minutes, Alexander strode into the hospital, his presence a whirlwind of controlled chaos. He found Sarah in the waiting room, huddled in a chair, looking utterly lost and vulnerable. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed, her usual composure shattered. Minutes stretched into an eternity. She felt herself weakening, the boy's weight feeling heavier with each passing second. Just when she thought her arms might give out, just as a wave threatened to pull them both under, she felt a subtle shift in the current. It was lessening. She had broken free. He knelt beside her, ignoring the curious glances of other hospital staff. "Sarah, how is he?" His voice was soft, genuinely concerned, a stark contrast to the boardroom tone she was accustomed to. With renewed, desperate strength, she turned and began to kick toward the shore, pulling the boy with her. The water was still rough, but the relentless pull was gone. She could see people now, pointing, shouting, finally realizing the gravity of the situation. A lifeguard, alerted by the commotion, was sprinting towards them, a rescue buoy trailing behind him. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide and tearful. "They're running more tests. They said it's a severe infection. He's so small. Alexander," her voice broke. Sarah gasped for air, her throat raw, her chest heaving. She felt the sand beneath her feet, then the blessed solidity of the shore. The lifeguard reached them, taking the boy from her arms. He was pale, his lips tinged blue, but he was breathing, shallowly. Alexander reached out, his hand instinctively covering hers. Her skin was cold, trembling. He felt a profound empathy, a shared anguish that transcended their vastly different worlds. He knew this fear, this agonizing helplessness. He had lived it. As the lifeguard began administering first aid, a crowd gathered, their faces a mixture of concern and awe. Sarah stumbled back, collapsing onto the wet sand, her body trembling uncontrollably. She was exhausted, soaked, and shivering, but a wave of profound relief washed over her. She had done it. She had saved him. "He's strong, Sarah," Alexander said, his voice firm, reassuring. "He's got the best doctors here. I've already contacted my own specialists. They're reviewing his case remotely. We'll get him through this." He wasn't just saying it, he believed it, and his conviction was a lifeline in Sarah's sea of despair. Her eyes, still stinging from the salt, scanned the faces in the crowd, looking for a parent, anyone who might claim the boy. That's when she saw him. A man, impeccably dressed in a light linen suit, despite the beach setting, pushing through the crowd with an aura of controlled urgency. His face was a mask of stark terror, his eyes wide and frantic. He was clearly wealthy, his presence exuding an undeniable power, even in his distress. He looked utterly out of place, like a rare, exotic bird dropped into a flock of seagulls. For the first time since the beach, Sarah saw Alexander not as the intimidating CEO, not as the mysterious benefactor, but as a fellow parent, raw and vulnerable, sharing her deepest fear. His eyes, usually so guarded, now reflected genuine concern, a profound understanding of her pain. He wasn't offering money or solutions, he was offering presence, support, and a shared humanity. He reached the lifeguard, his voice a guttural whisper. "Daniel, my son." They sat together for hours, a silent vigil. Alexander didn't try to take over, didn't make grand pronouncements. He simply was there. He listened as Sarah recounted Leo's symptoms, her voice trembling. He offered a steady hand, a quiet nod of understanding. He shared anecdotes about Daniel's own childhood illnesses, moments of paternal anxiety that revealed a side of him she had never imagined. Sarah watched as he knelt beside the boy, his hands hovering, trembling, over the small, still form. The lifeguard quickly reassured him, explaining that the boy was breathing, just unconscious. The man's shoulders slumped in a visible wave of relief, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah saw a raw, human vulnerability in his eyes that transcended his expensive clothes and imposing demeanor. In that sterile hospital environment, stripped of their respective social masks, the chasm between their worlds seemed to shrink. The billionaire CEO and the struggling single mother found common ground in their shared love for their children, their shared vulnerability as parents. Alexander dropped his CEO facade, revealing his genuine fears and anxieties as a father, echoing Sarah's own maternal concerns. Sarah saw beyond his wealth and power. recognizing a deep human connection based on their shared love for their children. This moment, born of crisis, significantly deepened their bond, laying bare a truth that no amount of money or secrecy could conceal. Then, his gaze lifted, meeting hers. His eyes, a startling shade of piercing blue, narrowed slightly, assessing her. There was a flicker of something unreadable in them. Gratitude, certainly, but also a hint of surprise, perhaps even a touch of suspicion. He was clearly a man unaccustomed to unexpected intrusions, especially ones involving his child and a disheveled stranger. The hospital waiting room had become a strange, temporary sanctuary. As Leo slowly but steadily improved, the sterile environment, once a source of terror, now held a quiet comfort. Sarah and Alexander continued their vigil, their shared vulnerability forging a bond that transcended their vastly different worlds. He was no longer just the intimidating CEO, he was a steadfast presence, a quiet strength in her darkest hour. She saw the lines of worry on his face when Leo's fever spiked, the genuine relief in his eyes when the doctors gave good news. He was simply a father, and in that shared humanity, the walls between them began to crumble. A woman, equally well-dressed and radiating an air of polished efficiency, rushed up to him, speaking quickly into a phone. "Mr. Thorne, the ambulance is 5 minutes out. Security is securing the perimeter." One afternoon, as Leo was finally moved out of the PQ and into a regular room, looking pale but alert, Alexander brought Daniel to visit. The two boys, who had met under such dramatic circumstances, instantly reconnected, their innocent chatter filling the quiet hospital room with a much-needed lightness. Sarah watched them, a warmth spreading through her chest. It was a glimpse of a future she hadn't dared to imagine, a future where Leo had a friend, and she had Alexander. Mr. Thorne. The name echoed in Sarah's mind. Alexander Thorne, the reclusive, notoriously private CEO of Thorne Enterprises, a colossal conglomerate whose name appeared on everything from luxury hotels to cutting-edge tech. He was a titan of industry, a man whose net worth was measured in billions, a figure of almost mythical power in the city. But even as their connection deepened, the secret of Alexander's discreet help still hung between them, an unspoken truth that Sarah's logical mind couldn't ignore. The pieces of the puzzle were too neatly aligned, too perfectly timed. The scholarship, the job, the car. It all pointed to one powerful, unseen hand. Sarah felt a sudden, dizzying disconnect. The boy she had just pulled from the jaws of the ocean, the child whose life she had just saved, was the son of that Alexander Thorne. Her world, defined by worn-out shoes and overdue bills, had just collided, violently and irrevocably, with a world of unimaginable wealth and influence. The irony was almost laughable. If she wasn't so utterly exhausted, the truth, as it often does, revealed itself in a mundane moment. Sarah was at home, finally catching up on paperwork from her new job, when she stumbled upon an old, forgotten file. It was a collection of rejection letters from various scholarship applications she'd submitted for Leo over the years, alongside her own attempts to find better-paying work. Tucked within them was a copy of Leo's academic transcript and her own resume, identical to the ones she had submitted for the Crestwood Academy scholarship and the data management specialist job. But these copies were dated before she had even applied for either. And stapled to the back of Leo's transcript was a small, almost invisible note, Thorne Enterprises, confidential. She watched as Alexander, now more composed, gently touched his son's forehead, a silent gesture of profound relief. He then stood, his gaze returning to Sarah, a complex mix of emotions swirling in his piercing blue eyes. He was about to speak, to offer something, anything. But Sarah, overwhelmed and suddenly acutely aware of her own disheveled appearance amidst the perfectly manicured chaos of his world, felt an instinctive urge to retreat. She was just a single mom, a cleaner and a barista, and she had just saved the son of a billionaire. The sheer absurdity of it all was too much to process. Sarah's breath hitched. Her blood ran cold, then hot with a sudden, furious flush. Thorne Enterprises. Alexander! It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. The anonymous benefactor. The perfectly timed job opening. The miraculous car replacement. It wasn't fate. It wasn't karma. It was him. All of it. Sarah stumbled back, the sand gritty beneath her bare feet, her body still trembling uncontrollably from the adrenaline and exertion. The lifeguard was now expertly tending to the boy, Daniel, while the man, Alexander Thorne, knelt beside his son, his hand gently stroking the boy's damp hair. The raw, primal fear that had contorted his features moments ago had softened into profound relief. A vulnerability that was startling on such a powerful man. Shock gave way to a wave of overwhelming emotions, disbelief, then a searing anger, and finally, a profound sense of betrayal. He had manipulated her life, however benevolently. He had taken away her hard-won independence, turning her struggles into a project, her triumphs into his orchestrations. Her fierce pride, the very quality he had supposedly admired, felt utterly trampled. She had fought so hard to stand on her own 2 feet, and he had, in his own way, subtly knocked them out from under her. Maria's cynical words echoed in her mind. Rich men don't do things for free, Sarah, especially not for single moms they've just met. He looked up again, his piercing blue eyes, once filled with frantic terror, now held a complex mix of gratitude, surprise, and a lingering, almost imperceptible awe. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements fluid and precise, even in his distress. He was taller than Sarah had initially realized, his presence commanding, even on a crowded beach. She felt a hot, prickling sensation behind her eyes, a mixture of hurt and indignation. How dare he? How dare he presume to know what she needed? To interfere so profoundly in her life, all while hiding behind a veil of anonymity. The genuine connection they had forged in the hospital, the shared vulnerability, now felt tainted, built on a foundation of deceit. You saved him. Alexander's voice was deep, a little hoarse, as if he was still grappling with the enormity of what had just happened. He took a step towards her, his gaze unwavering. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you. Without a second thought, Sarah grabbed her keys. She didn't care about the late hour or the fact that Alexander Thorne was likely in his impenetrable penthouse. She needed answers. She needed to confront him, to demand the truth, to reclaim her dignity. Sarah, still catching her breath, felt a flush creep up her neck. She was acutely aware of her soaked, clinging swimsuit, her tangled hair, and the sand plastered to her skin. She was a mess, standing before a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine, even after his son had nearly drowned. The stark contrast between them felt almost comical. She drove to his penthouse, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. The doorman, recognizing her from her visits to Daniel, let her through with a polite nod. She rode the elevator up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was nothing, she managed, her voice raspy from the salt water and exertion. Anyone would have done it. When Alexander opened the door to his penthouse, his expression shifted from surprise to immediate concern as he saw her face. Sarah. What's wrong? Is it Leo? Alexander's eyebrows, dark and perfectly sculpted, arched slightly. Anyone, I assure you, Miss. He paused, clearly expecting her to provide her name. Don't you dare, Sarah hissed, her voice low and trembling with suppressed fury. She pushed past him, striding into the vast, opulent living room. She held up the crumpled file, the Thorne Enterprises confidential note clearly visible. This is what's wrong. Sarah Miller. Alexander's eyes widened, a flicker of something akin to guilt, then resignation. Crossing his face, he closed the door, his usual composure cracking. Sarah, I can explain. Ms. Miller, he continued, his voice regaining some of its authoritative tone. Not everyone possesses the courage or the quick thinking you displayed. You went into that rip current without hesitation. You risked your own life. He gestured vaguely towards the water, then back to his son, now being carefully loaded onto a stretcher by paramedics who had just arrived. You saved my son's life. That is not nothing. Explain, she scoffed, her voice rising now, raw with emotion. Explain how Leo got into Crestwood. Explain how I got that job. Explain how my car magically died and was replaced by a brand new one. Explain how my entire life suddenly became convenient. She threw the file onto a sleek glass table, the papers scattering. You did all this, didn't you? You orchestrated everything. He reached into the inner pocket of his linen jacket, pulling out a sleek leather wallet. He extracted a thick wad of bills, easily a few $1,000s, and extended them towards her. Please, this is the least I can do. For your trouble, For your bravery." Alexander took a step towards her, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Yes, Sarah, I did. But it wasn't what you think." Sarah stared at the money. A small fortune in her world. It could pay for Leo's new shoes, fix the refrigerator, maybe even cover a month's rent. Her fingers twitched, a primal urge to grasp it, to alleviate just a fraction of her constant financial burden. But then, a stronger feeling surged through her. A fierce, unyielding pride. She hadn't saved Daniel for money. She had saved him because he was a child in danger. And she was a mother. Her instincts, her very being, wouldn't allow her to profit from such an act. "And what do I think, Alexander?" she challenged, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "That you decided to play God with my life. That you couldn't stand the thought of a single mother actually making it on her own, without your help, without your money." The tension between them, unspoken but palpable, hung in the air during their brief interactions. It was a fragile bridge, built on shared moments and unspoken admiration, now threatened by the weight of a secret. "No," he exclaimed, his own voice rising, a rare display of emotion from the usually stoic CEO. "That's not it at all. I saw your strength, Sarah. I saw your kindness, your unwavering dedication to Leo. And when you refused my money at the beach, when you walked away with such dignity, it profoundly affected me. I've never met anyone like you." "No," she said, her voice firmer now, surprising even herself. She pushed his hand gently back. "I can't take that. I didn't do it for money. I did it because he needed help. Any mother would understand." She glanced towards Leo, who was now cautiously approaching, his eyes wide with curiosity and a touch of concern. He took another step, his blue eyes earnest, pleading. "My world is filled with people who want things from me. You wanted nothing. You just acted out of pure goodness. I saw your struggles in the report, Sarah, and I wanted to help. Not as a payment, not as charity, but as a genuine desire to ease your burdens. I respected your pride, which is why I did it discreetly. I didn't want you to feel obligated, to feel like you owed me anything." Alexander's hand, still holding the money, froze in midair. His piercing blue eyes widened, a flicker of genuine astonishment replacing the earlier gratitude. He was a man accustomed to people wanting things from him, to every interaction having a price tag. Her refusal, so immediate and sincere, was clearly unprecedented in his experience. He paused, his gaze unwavering. "And then I realized it was more than just admiration. I found myself thinking about you constantly. I found myself drawn to you. Sarah, I was falling for you. And I wanted to help you. Not just because you saved Daniel, but because I care about you. Deeply." He lowered his hand, slowly, his gaze still fixed on her. You refuse." His tone was not angry, but genuinely perplexed, as if she had just spoken in a foreign language. Sarah stared at him, her anger warring with a dizzying rush of other emotions. His confession, so raw and unexpected, stripped away his carefully constructed facade, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't seen since Leo's crisis. She saw the genuine anguish in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice. He wasn't the cold, calculating CEO she had imagined. He was a man grappling with complex feelings, trying to navigate a relationship that defied all the rules of his world. "Yes, it's not right," Sarah insisted, feeling a surge of awkwardness but holding firm. "I'm just glad he's okay." She offered a small, tired smile, then turned her attention to Leo, who was now tugging at her arm. The truth, when finally laid bare, was far more complicated than she had anticipated. It wasn't just about manipulation. It was about admiration, respect, and a burgeoning, undeniable affection. A tense, emotional confrontation ensued, filled with accusations and explanations, tears and hesitant admissions. They were forced to confront the true nature of their complex relationship, a bond forged in crisis, nurtured in secret, and now, finally, revealed in a whirlwind of raw, unfiltered emotion. The secret was out, and with it, the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of a future they could build together, on a foundation of honesty, however painful its beginning. "Mom, are you okay? What happened?" Leo's voice was small, worried. The air in Alexander's penthouse was thick with the aftermath of their explosive confrontation. Sarah stood, trembling, her anger slowly giving way to a dizzying confusion. Alexander, usually so composed, looked genuinely distraught, his confession hanging in the air like a fragile, shimmering thing. He hadn't just admitted to orchestrating her life, he had admitted to falling for her. The sheer audacity of it, the unexpected vulnerability, left her momentarily speechless. Sarah knelt, pulling him into a tight, reassuring hug. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just a little tired. That boy needed help, and I helped him. He's going to be okay." She ruffled his hair, trying to project a calmness she didn't quite feel. "Falling for me," Sarah finally managed, her voice barely a whisper, a mix of disbelief and a strange, unfamiliar flutter in her chest. After all this, you think this is how you build a relationship?" "Alexander, by secretly manipulating my life." Alexander watched the interaction, a silent observer. He saw the genuine affection, the protective embrace, the way Sarah's entire demeanor softened when she looked at her son. He saw the worn fabric of Leo's swim trunks, the faint lines of exhaustion around Sarah's eyes, the quiet dignity in her refusal. It was a stark contrast to the superficiality and avarice that often surrounded him. In her, he saw something profoundly real, something he rarely encountered in his gilded cage. Alexander took a hesitant step closer, his eyes pleading. "I know it's not ideal. Sarah, believe me, I've agonized over this, but how else was I to help you? You refused my money. You're fiercely independent. I saw your struggles, and I saw your pride, and I didn't want to insult you. I just wanted to ease your burdens, to give you the opportunities you deserved, without making you feel indebted." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "And then my feelings grew. I didn't plan for that. It just happened." His personal assistant, the impeccably dressed woman, approached him again, her voice hushed. "Mr. Thorne, the paramedics are ready to transport Daniel. They suggest you ride with him." Sarah looked at him, truly looked at him, beyond the CEO persona, beyond the man who had secretly pulled strings. She saw the genuine anguish in his eyes, the raw honesty in his confession. He wasn't the cold, calculating manipulator she had initially envisioned. He was a man who, in his own misguided way, had tried to help, driven by a profound admiration that had blossomed into something deeper. Alexander nodded, but his eyes remained on Sarah and Leo. He took a step towards them again, a different expression on his face this time, less about transaction, more about genuine curiosity. "Ms. Miller," he began, his voice softer, I truly am indebted to you. If there is ever anything, you should have just told me," she said, her voice softer now, the anger ebbing, replaced by a deep weariness. "You should have been honest from the beginning. Just knowing he's safe is enough." Sarah interrupted gently. Standing up and taking Leo's hand, she felt a strong urge to escape, to return to the comforting predictability of her own humble life, away from the overwhelming presence of this powerful man and his world. "We should go. Leo's getting cold." "I know," he conceded, his voice heavy with regret. "And I regret that more than you know. I was afraid, Sarah. Afraid you'd push me away. Afraid you'd see me as just another rich man trying to buy his way into your life." She gave him a polite, if weary, nod, and began to lead Leo away, towards their worn beach towel and their small bag of snacks. She didn't look back, not wanting to prolong the awkwardness, not wanting to be seen as waiting for further offers. She just wanted to disappear back into the anonymity of the crowd. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city. Sarah's mind raced, replaying their interactions, seeing them now through the lens of his confession, his chance encounters, his genuine interest in Leo, his quiet presence at the hospital. It all made a terrifying, exhilarating kind of sense. The connection she had felt, the unexpected comfort in his presence, hadn't been an illusion. It had been real, even if built on a foundation of secrecy. Alexander watched her go, a strange, unfamiliar sensation stirring within him. He was used to people clamoring for his attention, for his favor, for his money. Sarah Miller had simply walked away, her only concern, her own child. Her only reward, the knowledge that she had saved another. Her refusal of his money, her quiet dignity, her raw, selfless courage. It was an anomaly in his carefully constructed, transactional world. She thought of Leo, thriving at Crestwood, his eyes shining with new confidence. She thought of her new job, the sense of purpose it gave her, the freedom from the constant grind. These were undeniable blessings, even if their source was complicated. Could she truly be angry at someone who had, however secretly, brought so much good into their lives? His assistant cleared her throat. "Mr. Thorne, Daniel needs you." "What now, Alexander?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. He tore his gaze away from Sarah's retreating figure, a flicker of something unreadable in his piercing blue eyes. He walked towards the ambulance, his mind already racing, not about business deals or market trends, but about the disheveled single mother who had just shown him a side of humanity he rarely encountered. He had offered her a reward, and she had refused. But in that refusal, she had given him something far more valuable, a profound sense of awe, and a spark of intense, unexpected curiosity. He knew, with a certainty that surprised even himself, that this wouldn't be the last he saw of Sarah Miller. He met her gaze, his blue eyes intense. "Now, we build something real, on honesty, on trust. If you'll let me?" He took another step, closing the distance between them. "I understand if you're angry. I understand if you want me to walk away. But please, Sarah, don't dismiss what we've felt, what we've shared, because of my mistakes. Give me a chance to prove my intentions." Alexander Thorne stood by the ambulance, watching Sarah Miller disappear into the crowd, a strange mix of emotions swirling within him. Gratitude, of course, a profound, gut-wrenching relief that his son was safe, but also a deep, unsettling curiosity. He was a man who dealt in facts and figures, in transactions. Every interaction in his world had a clear motive, a discernible price. Sarah Miller, with her quiet refusal of his money and her simple, unwavering dedication to a child who wasn't even her own, was an anomaly. She was a variable he couldn't calculate, a puzzle he couldn't solve with his usual tools. Sarah looked away, her heart aching with the weight of the decision. Her pride screamed at her to walk away, to reclaim her fierce independence, untainted by his influence. But her heart, battered by years of struggle and now unexpectedly stirred by his raw honesty, whispered a different possibility. She thought of Leo and how much he seemed to like Alexander, how happy he was at his new school. She thought of the quiet strength Alexander had offered her in the hospital, a strength she hadn't realized she desperately needed. As the ambulance doors closed, taking Daniel to a private hospital for observation, a standard procedure for a Thorne, Alexander's mind, usually laser-focused on multi-million-dollar deals, kept replaying the scene. Her tired eyes, the faint lines of worry etched on her face, the way she had plunged into the treacherous current without a moment's hesitation, and then her fierce, almost defiant, refusal of his generous offer. "It's not right," she had said. Those 3 words, so simple, yet so utterly foreign in his world, resonated deeply. Finally, she took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "It's not going to be easy. Alexander," she said, her voice firm, but without the earlier anger. "My pride, it's a big part of who I am, and trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild." He was used to people wanting things from him. Power, money, influence. They flattered, they schemed, they demanded. Sarah had simply walked away. Her only concern, her own son. Her only reward, the knowledge of a life saved. It was a stark, almost brutal, contrast to the avarice and superficiality that often surrounded him. He found himself admiring her, a feeling that was both unfamiliar and strangely compelling. A flicker of hope ignited in Alexander's eyes. "I know, and I'm willing to work for it, for as long as it takes. Mr. Thorne, I've secured Daniel's room. Dr. Peterson will meet us there," his assistant, Eleanor Vance, said, her voice crisp and efficient, pulling him back to the present. Eleanor was a master of logistics, a gatekeeper who ensured his world ran with precision. And so, a new chapter began. Tentative and uncertain, but undeniably hopeful. Sarah and Alexander decided to try and build a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. Their first challenge was navigating the immense chasm between their social worlds. Alexander's inner circle, accustomed to his aloofness and his carefully curated relationships, viewed Sarah with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. Whispers followed them. A gold digger, a charity case, an opportunistic single mother. Sarah, for her part, found herself uncomfortable in the opulent world of galas and high society, feeling like an imposter. Eleanor, Alexander said, his voice low, I need you to find out everything you can about Sarah Miller. They're just jealous. Mom, Leo said one evening, after Sarah expressed her discomfort about a particularly frosty encounter with one of Alexander's business associates. Leo, surprisingly perceptive for his age, had quickly bonded with Alexander. He saw Alexander not as a CEO, but as a kind, supportive figure who made his mom smile. Eleanor paused, her perfectly manicured hand hovering over her tablet. Ms. Miller. The woman who saved Daniel. Her tone was carefully neutral, but a hint of surprise flickered in her eyes. Alexander rarely showed personal interest in anyone outside his immediate, highly vetted circle. Alexander, too, faced skepticism. His board members questioned his focus. His friends wondered about his sudden interest in a woman so far outside his usual type. But he met their skepticism with a quiet resolve. He brought Sarah to more events, not as a trophy, but as his partner. Proudly introducing her, he subtly challenged the assumptions of his peers, demonstrating Sarah's intelligence, her integrity, her quiet strength. Yes, everything. Where she lives, where she works, her financial situation, her background, discreetly. Eleanor, very discreetly. He didn't want her to feel scrutinized, only understood. Crucially, Leo began to bond deeply with Alexander. Alexander, usually reserved, found himself effortlessly connecting with Leo, sharing stories, playing games, and offering gentle guidance. He attended Leo's school events, cheering him on from the sidelines. A stark contrast to the often absent fathers of Daniel's friends. Leo, who had grown up with only Sarah, found in Alexander a stable, loving male presence. He saw Alexander as a kind and supportive figure, which helped bridge the gap between their parents, making the idea of a blended family feel less daunting, more natural. Eleanor nodded, her expression returning to its usual professional blankness. Understood, Mr. Thorne. I'll have a preliminary report by morning. Sarah watched their bond grow, a warmth spreading through her chest. It was a testament to Alexander's genuine character, a confirmation that his feelings were real, not just a fleeting infatuation. She saw how happy Leo was, how much he thrived with Alexander's presence in their lives. This, more than anything, helped her to slowly let go of her lingering resentment, to trust in the authenticity of Alexander's intentions. As Alexander rode in the back of his sleek, black sedan towards the hospital, his mind was not on Daniel's recovery. He trusted the medical team implicitly, but on Sarah. He found himself wondering about her life, the struggles she must face to maintain such quiet dignity. He, who could buy anything, suddenly felt a strange sense of inadequacy. His money, his power, meant nothing in the face of a rip current. It was her courage, her raw humanity, that had mattered. They had long, honest conversations, often late into the night, dissecting their past, their fears, their hopes. Sarah learned about Alexander's own lonely childhood, the pressures of his family legacy, the emotional distance that had defined his relationships. He learned about her dreams, her quiet resilience, the sacrifices she had made for Leo. They were building bridges, brick by painful brick, across the chasm of their different lives. The next morning, true to Eleanor's word, a concise yet comprehensive report landed on Alexander's desk. He dismissed his usual morning briefing, his gaze fixed on the document. Sarah Miller, single mother, lost her husband, a firefighter, 5 years ago in a tragic accident. No family support, working 3 jobs: office cleaner, barista, freelance data entry, rent consistently late, car on its last legs. Son, Leo, bright, excelling in school, but struggling with the cost of extracurricular activities. The challenges were immense, the societal pressures relentless. But in the quiet moment when Leo would laugh with Alexander, or when Alexander would simply hold her hand, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness. The secret was out. The anger had been confronted. And now, they were choosing to move forward, together. The terrifying, exhilarating possibility of a future they could build together, on a foundation of honesty, however painful its beginning, was slowly, tentatively, becoming a reality. He read about her late husband's heroism, the small pension that barely covered a fraction of their needs, the quiet determination with which Sarah had built a life for herself and Leo from the ashes of tragedy. He saw the numbers, the stark reality of her financial precariousness, and a wave of something akin to indignation washed over him. How could someone so selfless, so genuinely good, struggle so profoundly, while others, far less deserving, wallowed in excess? The fragile peace Sarah and Alexander had painstakingly built, a bridge across their disparate worlds, was about to face its first true test. Their decision to pursue a relationship, however tentative, did not go unnoticed in Alexander's elite circles. In a world where power and status were meticulously guarded, Sarah, the single mother from a humble background, was an anomaly, a disruption to the carefully ordered hierarchy. And where there is disruption, there is often an antagonist. His admiration for her deepened, transforming into something more complex, something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity. Sarah was clearly too proud for that. It was a profound respect, a recognition of a strength that dwarfed his own, a strength forged not in boardrooms, but in the crucible of everyday survival. He found himself drawn to her integrity, to the quiet grace with which she navigated her difficult life. It was a subtle obsession, a persistent hum in the back of his mind. Enter Victoria Sterling, elegant, poised, and with a lineage as old and established as the Thorne family itself. Victoria had long considered herself Alexander's rightful match. Their families had intertwined for generations, their fortunes aligned. She had patiently waited for Alexander to emerge from his work-obsessed shell, believing their eventual union was an inevitability, a logical progression of their social standing. Sarah's sudden appearance, her undeniable connection with Alexander, and the way he openly championed her, was an insult Victoria could not and would not tolerate. He thought of his own life, a gilded cage of endless meetings, strategic maneuvers, and superficial interactions. He had wealth beyond measure, but often felt a profound emptiness. His relationships were transactional, his circle of acquaintances filled with those who sought to gain from him. Daniel was his only true connection, and even that was often mediated by nannies and private tutors. Sarah's world, though materially impoverished, seemed rich in something he desperately lacked: genuine human connection. Unburdened by ulterior motives, Victoria saw Sarah not as a woman of strength and kindness, but as an opportunist, a gold digger who had cleverly manipulated Alexander's gratitude. She couldn't fathom that a man like Alexander, who had access to the most sophisticated and glamorous women in the world, would genuinely fall for someone so ordinary. It had to be a calculated move on Sarah's part, a desperate grab for wealth and status. This conviction fueled a cold, simmering rage within Victoria, transforming her polished exterior into a weapon. He found himself looking at her photo in the report, a slightly blurry image from a public record. She wasn't conventionally glamorous, but there was a quiet beauty in her tired eyes, a resilience in her expression. He zoomed in, noticing the faint lines around her mouth that spoke of countless smiles given, even when her heart was heavy. He realized, with a jolt, that he hadn't just been curious about her circumstances, he was drawn to her. Her initial attacks were subtle, almost imperceptible. She would host lavish charity galas, ensuring Sarah received an invitation, but placing her at a table far from Alexander, with guests who were known for their snobbery and disdain for new money. Sarah, uncomfortable but determined, would navigate these social minefields with quiet dignity, often excusing herself early, which Victoria would then interpret as a lack of sophistication or a clear sign she didn't belong. The thought was unsettling. Alexander Thorne didn't get drawn to people. He assessed, he strategized, he acquired. Emotions were a weakness, a distraction. Yet, with Sarah, something was different. Her refusal of his money had stripped away his usual leverage, leaving him with nothing but his own genuine desire to help, to understand, to simply be in her presence. Did you see Sarah Miller at the Sterling Gala? Victoria would purr to her circle of friends, a faint smirk playing on her lips. She seemed quite out of her depth. Poor Alexander, so easily taken in by a sob story. These whispers, laced with insinuation, traveled quickly through the city's elite, painting Sarah as a calculating social climber. He closed the report, a new resolve forming in his mind. He wouldn't offer her money again. That was clearly not the way. but he couldn't simply let her disappear back into the anonymity of her struggles. He wanted to know more. He wanted to understand the source of her unwavering kindness. He wanted to see that quiet dignity again. Alexander, though aware of the subtle social slights, initially dismissed them as petty jealousy. He had faced far worse in the cutthroat world of corporate takeovers. He believed Sarah's strength would allow her to rise above it. However, he underestimated Victoria's cunning and her deep understanding of the subtle levers of power and reputation within their social stratum. He picked up his phone, dialing Eleanor. "Eleanor, cancel my afternoon meetings. I need to observe a new investment opportunity." He knew she would understand the coded message. He wasn't looking for a business deal. He was looking for Sarah Miller. His curiosity, once a spark, had ignited into a quiet, determined pursuit. He didn't know what he wanted from her, or what this unexpected pull meant, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. The world of Alexander Thorne, the reclusive CEO, was about to be subtly, irrevocably, altered by the kindness of a single mother. Victoria's tactics escalated. She began to subtly undermine Sarah's professional reputation. Through her extensive network, she spread rumors about Sarah's new job at the Thorne subsidiary, hinting that her position was merely a favor from Alexander, not earned merit. She implied that Sarah lacked the necessary qualifications, and that her rapid ascent was suspicious. The hospital room was a sterile white cocoon, a stark contrast to the chaotic vibrancy of the beach. Daniel, pale but stable, slept soundly in the crisp sheets. A small IV drip, a silent testament to his ordeal. Alexander sat beside him, his hand resting gently on his son's forehead, a gesture of profound relief. Yet, even with Daniel safe, his mind kept drifting back to the beach, to Sarah Miller. One afternoon, Sarah overheard two colleagues whispering in the break room. "Did you hear? She only got the job because of Alexander Thorne. Apparently, she saved his kid, and he's paying her back. Not exactly fair to the rest of us who actually earned our way here." The words stung, a cold splash of reality. Sarah had worked tirelessly to prove herself, to master her new role. To have her efforts dismissed as mere patronage was a bitter blow. She felt a familiar knot of anger and humiliation tighten in her stomach. Her image was stubbornly imprinted in his thoughts, the exhaustion in her eyes, the raw courage in her actions, and most strikingly, the quiet dignity in her refusal of his money. He was a man who understood leverage, who knew the price of everything, but Sarah had no price. Her act of heroism was pure, untainted by expectation or desire for reward. It unsettled him, intrigued him, and in a way he couldn't quite articulate, humbled him. She confronted Alexander that evening, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Are people saying, 'I only got this job because of you?'" He had spent his life building an empire, navigating a world where every smile had a motive, every favor a hidden cost. People either wanted his money, his influence, or his connections. To encounter someone who genuinely wanted nothing, who simply acted out of a fundamental human decency, was like discovering a rare, unblemished gem in a pile of polished fakes. Alexander sighed, running a hand over his face. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I knew there would be talk. People in my world, they're cynical. They don't understand genuine kindness." The preliminary report Eleanor had delivered earlier that morning lay on the bedside table, a thin folder containing the bare facts of Sarah's life. He picked it up, rereading the lines that detailed her struggles, the loss of her husband, the 3 demanding jobs, the constant financial tightrope. He saw the numbers, the meager income, the accumulating bills, and a wave of something akin to indignation washed over him. How could someone so selfless, so genuinely good, struggle so profoundly, while others, far less deserving, wallowed in excess? It felt fundamentally unjust. "But it's not true. Is it?" she pressed, her eyes searching his. "I earned this, didn't I? I worked hard for it." His admiration for her deepened, transforming into something more complex than simple gratitude. It wasn't pity. Sarah, from what he had observed, was clearly too proud for that. It was a profound respect, a recognition of a strength that dwarfed his own, a strength forged not in boardrooms, but in the crucible of everyday survival. She possessed a quiet resilience, a fierce determination to protect her son. That resonated with a part of him he rarely acknowledged. He found himself drawn to her integrity, to the quiet grace with which she navigated her difficult life, unburdened by the pretense and artifice that defined his own. It was a subtle obsession, a persistent hum in the back of his mind. He thought of his own life, a gilded cage of endless meetings, strategic maneuvers, and superficial interactions. He had wealth beyond measure, but often felt a profound emptiness. His relationships were transactional, his circle of acquaintances filled with those who sought to gain from him. Daniel was his only true connection, and even that was often mediated by nannies, private tutors, and highly paid security details. Sarah's world, though materially impoverished, seemed rich in something he desperately lacked: genuine human connection. Unburdened by ulterior motives, he found himself looking at her photo in the report again, a slightly blurry image from a public record. She wasn't conventionally glamorous, but there was a quiet beauty in her tired eyes, a resilience in her expression. He zoomed in, noticing the faint lines around her mouth that spoke of countless smiles given even when her heart was heavy. He realized, with a jolt, that he hadn't just been curious about her circumstances, he was drawn to her. The thought was unsettling. Alexander Thorne didn't get drawn to people. He assessed, he strategized, he acquired. Emotions were a weakness, a distraction, yet, with Sarah, something was different. Her refusal of his money had stripped away his usual leverage, leaving him with nothing but his own genuine desire to help, to understand, to simply be in her presence. Victoria's machinations extended beyond professional sabotage. She began to subtly interfere with Alexander's business dealings, creating minor, yet persistent, obstacles. A crucial meeting would be mysteriously delayed, a key document misplaced, a minor scandal leaked to the press about a Thorne subsidiary, all designed to distract Alexander and make him question his judgment, particularly his judgment in personal matters. She wanted him to see Sarah as a liability, a distraction from his empire. He closed the report, a new resolve forming in his mind. He wouldn't offer her money again. That was clearly not the way. Her pride, he now understood, was as formidable as his own, but he couldn't simply let her disappear back into the anonymity of her struggles. He wanted to know more. He wanted to understand the source of her unwavering kindness. He wanted to see that quiet dignity again. Her most insidious tactic, however, was psychological. She knew Alexander's greatest vulnerability was Daniel. Victoria, who had known Daniel since he was a baby, began to subtly plant seeds of doubt in his mind about Sarah. She casually mentioned how much attention Alexander was giving Sarah and Leo, implying Daniel was being neglected. She'd subtly highlight the differences between Daniel's privileged life and Leo's more modest background, suggesting they were too different to truly be brothers. He picked up his phone, dialing Eleanor. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "I need you to expand on the Sarah Miller file. Not just background, but her daily routine. Where does she work? What are her hours? What school does her son attend in?" "Daniel, darling," Victoria would say, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It must be so exciting having new people around. Though I do hope your father remembers his first priority." Eleanor, ever the professional, didn't betray a hint of surprise. "Understood. Mr. Thorne, any specific reason for this expanded inquiry?" Daniel, a sensitive and observant child, began to show subtle signs of distress. He'd cling to Alexander more, or ask hesitant questions about how long Sarah and Leo would be staying. Alexander, initially oblivious, eventually noticed the shift in Daniel's demeanor. It was a subtle but effective way to create friction, to make Alexander question if his burgeoning relationship was truly good for his son. Alexander paused. How could he explain the inexplicable pull he felt, the sudden, intense desire to understand a woman who had, in a single act of selfless courage, shaken the foundations of his carefully constructed world? "Let's just say," he finally replied, a hint of something akin to a smile touching his lips, "I'm observing a new investment opportunity, one with significant long-term potential." He knew she would understand the coded message. He wasn't looking for a business deal. He was looking for Sarah Miller. His curiosity, once a spark, had ignited into a quiet, determined pursuit. He didn't know what he wanted from her, or what this unexpected pull meant, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. The world of Alexander Thorne, the reclusive CEO, was about to be subtly, irrevocably, altered by the kindness of a single mother. The pressure mounted on Sarah as well. She felt the weight of the whispers, the subtle snubs, The constant feeling of being judged, her fierce independence, once her greatest strength, now felt like a target. She saw the toll it was taking on Alexander, the added stress on his already demanding life. Doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep into her heart. Was she truly worth all this trouble? Was she inadvertently bringing chaos into Alexander's and Daniel's lives? Over the next few days, Alexander found himself in a strange new routine. Instead of his usual power lunches, he'd find himself driving past the small, unassuming coffee shop where Sarah worked her afternoon shift. He'd watch her through the window, a blur of motion behind the counter, her smile genuine as she handed a latte to a customer. He saw her interact with Leo after school, their easy laughter a stark contrast to the often strained silence of his own home. He learned her office cleaning route, the bus she took, the small, independent grocery store she frequented. One evening, after a particularly draining day filled with both professional slights and social snubs, Sarah found herself staring out her window, the city lights a distant blur. She thought of Victoria Sterling, her perfectly coiffed hair and venomous smile. She thought of the whispers, the accusations, the insidious way they chipped away at her confidence. She knew this was just the beginning. The antagonist had emerged, and she was relentless. Sarah and Alexander's nascent relationship, born from crisis and nurtured in secret, was now under direct assault, facing a web of deceit designed to tear them apart. The battle for their future had truly begun. He never approached her. Not yet. He simply observed. Like a scientist studying a fascinating, complex specimen, he noticed the small details, the way she always had a book tucked into her bag, the patient way she listened to Leo's endless stories, the quiet determination in her stride even after a long day. Each observation deepened his fascination, confirming the initial impression of a woman of immense character. The subtle jabs and whispered rumors orchestrated by Victoria Sterling had begun to take their toll. Sarah felt the chill of her colleagues' averted gazes, the polite but distant smiles of Alexander's acquaintances. Her fierce independence, once her shield, now felt like a target, constantly under scrutiny. Alexander, for his part, was growing increasingly frustrated by the minor but persistent disruptions to his business. Knowing Victoria was behind them, a phantom menace he couldn't quite pin down. The fragile peace they had built was indeed under siege, and Victoria, relentless in her pursuit, was about to escalate her tactics. His admiration grew, transforming into a subtle obsession. He found himself thinking about her at odd hours, during boring board meetings, or while signing multi-million-dollar contracts. He, Alexander Thorne, the man who commanded empires, was captivated by a woman who struggled to make ends meet. It was illogical, unprecedented, and utterly compelling. He knew he couldn't keep observing from a distance forever. The time would come to bridge the gap between their worlds, but he wanted to understand her better first, to ensure his next move wasn't a misstep. He wanted to approach her not as a grateful billionaire, but as something more, something genuine. Victoria's ultimate goal was to make Sarah appear unsuitable for Alexander, a liability that would eventually force him to choose between his reputation and his burgeoning relationship. She decided to strike at Sarah's most vulnerable point, her integrity and her perceived financial motives. Alexander Thorne was a man of action, accustomed to orchestrating events, not waiting for them to unfold. His observations of Sarah Miller, while enlightening, had reached their limit. He couldn't simply watch her from a distance forever. The quiet admiration, the subtle obsession that had taken root, demanded a more direct approach. But how to approach a woman who had so clearly rejected his attempts at a transactional thank you? He needed to create chance encounters, situations where their paths might cross naturally, without the overwhelming shadow of his wealth or the recent dramatic rescue. Her first major move was a meticulously crafted smear campaign. Through a network of gossip columnists and social media influencers she secretly controlled, Victoria began leaking carefully distorted information about Sarah. The narrative was simple: Sarah Miller, the heroic single mother, was actually a calculating opportunist who had used her son's rescue as a stepping stone to ensnare a billionaire. Anonymous sources claimed Sarah had been seen frequenting high-end boutiques, making extravagant purchases, and living a lifestyle far beyond her apparent means, all implied to be funded by Alexander's largesse. His first opportunity arose at the small, independent coffee shop where Sarah worked her afternoon shift. Alexander, a connoisseur of high-end artisanal coffee, usually had his personal barista prepare his morning brew. But one Tuesday, instead of heading to his private office, he instructed his driver to take him to the Daily Grind, a quaint, slightly worn establishment on a bustling street. Sarah first encountered the whispers online, a seemingly innocuous social media post by a local gossip blogger. Is Thorne Enterprises CEO's new flame living a champagne lifestyle on a lemonade budget, accompanied by a blurry, out-of-context photo of Sarah leaving a department store with a shopping bag, a gift for Leo's birthday, bought with her own hard-earned new salary. The comments section was a cesspool of judgment and speculation. Typical gold digger. One read, "Saw her at the gala. Looked like a deer in headlights." Another sneered. He walked in, the aroma of roasted beans and warm pastries filling the air, a stark contrast to the sterile gleam of his corporate headquarters. Sarah was behind the counter, her movements efficient and practiced, her smile genuine as she took an order from an elderly woman. She looked tired, he noted, but her eyes still held that spark of resilience. The words felt like a physical assault. Sarah, who had always prided herself on her honesty and hard work, felt her reputation being shredded by unseen hands. The accusations of gold digging, the very thing Maria had cynically warned her about, cut deep. She hadn't asked for Alexander's money, had even refused it. But the narrative was already set, amplified by the echo chamber of social media and the city's elite. He joined the short line, feeling an unfamiliar flutter of nerves. This was far more daunting than any hostile takeover. When it was his turn, Sarah looked up, her smile faltering slightly as recognition dawned. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of surprise, then a hint of guarded curiosity. She confronted Alexander, her face pale with hurt and indignation. "Have you seen this? They're saying I'm a gold digger, that I'm using you." She held out her phone, the hateful comments glaring from the screen. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice a little softer than he remembered. "What can I get for you?" Alexander's jaw tightened. He had seen the posts, and his anger at Victoria was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. "It's Victoria. Sarah. She's relentless. Don't let it get to you. We know it's not true." Alexander cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. "Just a black coffee, please. And it's Alexander." "But everyone else doesn't," she cried, her voice trembling. "My colleagues are looking at me differently. Even some of Leo's new school parents are giving me strange looks. This is affecting my life." "Alexander, our lives?" Sarah nodded slowly, her brow furrowing slightly as she turned to the espresso machine. "Right. Alexander." The name sounded strange on her lips, a little too familiar for their brief, dramatic encounter. She poured the coffee, her movements precise, then handed it to him. Their fingers brushed briefly, and a jolt, subtle yet distinct, passed between them. Victoria's schemes then escalated to a more direct attack on Alexander's business. She subtly manipulated stock prices of a minor Thorne subsidiary, creating a temporary dip that caused a ripple of concern among investors. She leaked false information about an upcoming merger, causing confusion and uncertainty in the market. These were not catastrophic blows, but they were persistent, designed to create a sense of instability and to make Alexander question if his personal life was interfering with his professional judgment. "Thank you," he said, perhaps a little too quickly. He took a sip. It was surprisingly good, robust and unpretentious. "This is excellent. Mr. Thorne, there's been an unusual fluctuation in the shares of Thorne Innovations," Eleanor reported one morning, her voice unusually strained, "and a rumor about the upcoming merger with Apex Corp. It seems coordinated." Sarah offered a small, polite smile. "Glad you like it." She glanced around the busy shop, clearly signaling the conversation was over. Alexander slammed his fist on his desk. "Victoria, she's getting bolder." He knew she was trying to prove that Sarah was a distraction, a weakness he couldn't afford. The pressure on him intensified, not just from the market, but from his own board members, who were subtly questioning his focus. Alexander, however, wasn't ready to leave. He found an empty table in the corner, nursing his coffee, pretending to read the financial news on his tablet, but his eyes kept drifting back to Sarah, watching her interact with customers, her easy laughter with a coworker, the way she effortlessly navigated the rush. He stayed for nearly an hour, an unprecedented amount of time for him to spend on anything not directly related to business. When he finally left, He felt a strange sense of accomplishment, a small victory in this new, uncharted territory. But Victoria's most insidious attack was yet to come, targeting the very heart of Alexander's world, Daniel. She knew that if she could drive a wedge between Daniel and Sarah, or make Alexander believe Sarah was a threat to Daniel's well-being, she would win. The next chance encounter was at Leo's school. Alexander had discreetly learned about a parent-teacher association bake sale Sarah was volunteering at. He arrived on a Saturday morning, dressed in casual, yet expensive, clothes, feeling utterly out of place amidst the bustling parents and sticky-fingered children. Victoria began to arrange playdates for Daniel with children whose parents were known for their strong opinions on social class and appropriate associations. During these playdates, she would subtly introduce the idea that Daniel's father was neglecting him for his new family. She would lament how Daniel seemed lonely or confused by the sudden changes in his life, always implying Sarah and Leo were the cause. Sarah spotted him by the cupcake stand, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Alexander?" she asked, a note of bewilderment in her voice. "Are you lost?" "Daniel." "Darling," Victoria purred one afternoon, as Daniel played quietly with a toy car. "Your father seems to be spending so much time with Leo now. Do you ever miss just having him all to yourself?" Her voice was soft, seemingly innocent, but the words were carefully chosen, designed to plant seeds of resentment. He managed a chuckle. "Not exactly. Well, he's a bit obsessed with the school fair. I thought I'd bring him by." Daniel, conveniently, was with his nanny, having a prearranged playdate. Alexander felt a pang of guilt for the white lie, but he knew a direct approach would only put Sarah on guard. Daniel, a sensitive and perceptive child, began to internalize these subtle suggestions. He started asking Alexander hesitant questions. "Dad, are you going to spend more time with Leo than with me now? Or is Sarah going to live with us? Will Leo share my toys?" His tone was never accusatory, but laced with a quiet anxiety that tugged at Alexander's heart. "Oh," Sarah said, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She probably assumed he was just being a good father, bringing his son to a public event. "Well, welcome. Can I interest you in a cupcake?" She held out a plate of brightly frosted treats. Alexander, usually so astute, was initially slow to pick up on the subtle manipulation of Daniel. He attributed Daniel's questions to natural childhood anxieties about change. But as Daniel became more withdrawn, clinging to him more often, and occasionally expressing a reluctance to spend time with Sarah and Leo, Alexander began to notice the pattern. He saw Victoria's hand in it, a cold fury building within him. This was a line she should never have crossed. He took one, a slightly lopsided chocolate cupcake. "Thank you. You made these." The pressure mounted on Sarah as well. She felt the weight of the whispers, the subtle snubs, the constant feeling of being judged. Her fierce independence, once her greatest strength, now felt like a target. She saw the toll it was taking on Alexander, the added stress on his already demanding life, doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep into her heart. Was she truly worth all this trouble? Was she inadvertently bringing chaos into Alexander's and Daniel's lives? The idea of walking away, of retreating back to her simpler, anonymous life, began to feel like a tempting escape. "Some of them," she admitted, a faint blush on her cheeks. Leo helped with the sprinkles. One evening, after a particularly draining day filled with both professional slights and social snubs, and a quiet, anxious conversation with Daniel, Sarah found herself staring out her window, the city lights a distant blur. She thought of Victoria Sterling, her perfectly coiffed hair and venomous smile. She thought of the whispers, the accusations, the insidious way they chipped away at her confidence. She knew this was just the beginning. The antagonist had emerged, and she was relentless. Sarah and Alexander's nascent relationship, born from crisis and nurtured in secret, was now under direct assault, facing a web of deceit designed to tear them apart. The battle for their future had truly begun. And the stakes, now including Daniel's emotional well-being, had never been higher. They stood there awkwardly for a moment, the sounds of children playing and parents chatting swirling around them. Alexander, usually so confident, felt a strange sense of unease. He was out of his element, stripped of his usual power dynamics. The weight of Victoria's relentless campaign pressed down on Sarah and Alexander, a suffocating blanket of doubt and suspicion. Sarah felt the sting of every whispered judgment, every sidelong glance from colleagues and parents at Leo's school. Her confidence, once so resilient, was being chipped away by the constant insinuation that she was nothing more than a calculating opportunist. Alexander, meanwhile, grappled with the insidious disruptions to his business and, more painfully, the subtle anxiety growing in Daniel's eyes. The temptation to retreat, to surrender to the relentless pressure, was a silent, insidious whisper in both their minds. Leo's doing well. By the way, he offered, trying to bridge the gap. He talks about your son, Daniel, quite a bit. One evening, after another particularly draining day, Sarah sat with Alexander in his penthouse, the vast city lights twinkling outside, a stark contrast to the darkness that seemed to be closing in around them. She had just returned from a school event where a group of mothers had pointedly turned their backs when she approached. Sarah's expression softened. That's good. Leo really enjoyed meeting him. He doesn't get to play with many kids outside of school. Her gaze drifted to a group of children playing tag, a wistful look in her eyes. Maybe this isn't worth it. Alexander, Sarah said, her voice barely audible, raw with exhaustion. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a weariness that went bone deep. Maybe Maria was right. Maybe I'm just bringing chaos into your life. And Daniel's. Their conversation was stilted, filled with pauses, but each pause was less uncomfortable than the last. They talked about their sons, about the challenges of single parenthood, though his challenges were vastly different from hers, and even, briefly, about the simple joys of a sunny Saturday. Sarah still seemed surprised by his presence, a hint of suspicion lingering in her eyes, but there was also a reluctant curiosity. She wasn't dismissing him outright. Alexander's jaw tightened. He reached across the table, taking her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Don't you dare say that. Sarah, you are worth every single challenge. And you are not bringing chaos. You are bringing light. Victoria is bringing chaos, and we will face it. Together. Over the next few weeks, these chance encounters continued. Alexander would coincidentally be at the same park where Leo played, or happened to be at the same grocery store, always making sure Daniel was with him at least once to lend credence to his presence. Sarah, initially wary, found herself slowly lowering her guard. He wasn't demanding anything, wasn't pushing money on her. He simply seemed present, and surprisingly, genuinely interested in her life, in Leo, in the small, everyday things that made up her world. His words, spoken with such conviction, were a lifeline. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw not just determination, but a profound belief in her, a steadfast loyalty that cut through the noise of the outside world. In that moment, the doubt began to recede, replaced by a renewed sense of resolve. They had faced a crisis together in the hospital, and they had navigated the painful truth of his secrets. This, too, they could face. Their conversations grew less awkward, more intriguing. Sarah found herself sharing snippets of her day, her struggles, her hopes for Leo. She learned about Alexander's relentless work ethic, the immense pressure he faced, and the surprising loneliness that came with his position. She saw glimpses of a man who, despite his immense wealth, carried his own burdens, his own quiet anxieties. He was more than just the CEO. He was a father, a man who, beneath the polished exterior, seemed to be searching for something real. But how Sarah asked, her voice still laced with despair, "She's everywhere. Alexander, she's poisoning everything." One afternoon, at the coffee shop, Alexander lingered after getting his coffee. "Sarah," he began, his voice softer than usual. I know this might sound strange, but I've been thinking about what you said at the beach, about not doing it for money." Alexander squeezed her hand. "She thrives in the shadows. Sarah, she thrives on innuendo and rumor. We fight back with truth and transparency. We expose her for what she is." Sarah tensed, bracing herself for another attempt to offer her a reward. This was a new kind of battle for Alexander. In the corporate world, he dealt with hostile takeovers and market manipulation with cold, strategic logic. But this was personal. This was about protecting Sarah, protecting Daniel, protecting the nascent family they were trying to build. And for that, he would fight with every resource at his command. "And I respect that," he continued, sensing her apprehension. "But I want to help. Not as a payment, but as a gesture of genuine gratitude. I know you work incredibly hard. Is there anything I can do, quietly, to ease some of your burdens? Something that wouldn't offend your pride. Their first step was open communication. Alexander began to share every detail of Victoria's machinations with Sarah. The manipulated stock prices, the leaked rumors, the subtle poisoning of Daniel's mind. He didn't shield her from the ugliness. He armed her with knowledge. Sarah, in turn, confided in him about the social slights, the whispers at work, the feeling of being constantly judged. This shared burden, this complete honesty, became the bedrock of their united front. Sarah stared at him, caught off guard. His sincerity was disarming. He wasn't offering charity, he was offering a hand, acknowledging her dignity. The thought of all her struggles, the endless bills, the worn-out car, flashed through her mind. It was tempting, so tempting, to say yes. But her pride, that fierce, unyielding part of her, held her back. We need to address Daniel's anxiety first, Alexander stated, his voice firm. Victoria's tactics with him are unforgivable. I appreciate that, Alexander, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But I can manage. We always do. She offered him a small, tired smile. Thank you, though. Really. They began spending more intentional, undivided time with Daniel and Leo together. They made sure Daniel understood that Sarah and Leo were not replacing anyone, but expanding their family. They emphasized the joy of having a brother, the fun of shared adventures. Alexander explained, in simple terms, that some people might try to make him feel bad about new people in their lives, but that those people were wrong. He reinforced Daniel's security in his love and Sarah's genuine affection for him. Alexander nodded, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes, but also a renewed sense of respect. He hadn't expected her to accept immediately. Her refusal, once again, only deepened his admiration. He realized that helping Sarah would require more than just money. It would require ingenuity, subtlety, and a deep understanding of her fierce independence. He would find a way, he decided. He would find a way to ease her burdens, to bring a little more light into her demanding life, without ever making her feel indebted. The seeds of connection had been planted, awkward and fragile, but undeniably present. And in the quiet determination of Alexander Thorne, a new chapter of unforeseen encounters was just beginning. One afternoon, Alexander orchestrated a casual conversation between himself, Sarah, and Daniel. Daniel, you know how much I love you. Right, he began, pulling his son close, and you know how much Sarah cares about you too. Daniel nodded shyly. Sometimes, when big changes happen, people can get a little confused, or even try to make you feel worried. Has anyone been telling you things that make you feel sad about Sarah or Leo? Of course you did, Alexander said firmly, pulling her into a reassuring embrace. You're brilliant. Sarah, you're one of the best hires that department has seen in years. This is Victoria. I suspect she's trying to drive a wedge between us. Daniel hesitated, then looked at Sarah, then back at his father. Victoria said, she said you wouldn't have time for me anymore. Alexander Thorne, a man who built empires on strategic thinking, now faced his most delicate challenge: how to help Sarah Miller, without her knowing, without bruising her fierce pride. Her refusal of his money had been a clear, undeniable statement. He couldn't simply send her a check or pay her bills directly. That would be an insult, turning her selfless act into a transaction she clearly disdained. He needed ingenuity, subtlety, and the vast, almost invisible network of resources at his command. Sarah's heart ached, but she kept her voice steady. Daniel, that's not true. Your dad loves you more than anything. And Leo and I love you too. We're building a bigger, happier family. More people to love you, not less. His first move was towards Leo. Alexander remembered Sarah's wistful look at the school fair, her quiet admission that Leo didn't get to play with many kids outside of school, and her concerns about extracurricular cost. He instructed Eleanor to discreetly research local private schools with excellent academic programs and robust scholarship opportunities, specifically looking for one that offered full tuition waivers for students demonstrating exceptional promise. Coupled with financial need, within days, a meticulously prepared application, complete with glowing recommendations from Leo's current teachers obtained through a series of carefully placed anonymous inquiries, was submitted to the prestigious Crestwood Academy. Alexander reinforced her words, his gaze unwavering. Victoria is wrong, son, and she's not a friend to our family. We will always have time for you. Always. This open, honest conversation, directly addressing Victoria's manipulation, began to chip away at Daniel's anxieties, replacing them with a newfound security. Sarah received the acceptance letter for Leo a few weeks later. It arrived in a plain envelope, addressed simply to her, with no return address. Inside, a letter from Crestwood Academy congratulated Leo on his outstanding academic potential and offered him a full, merit-based scholarship, covering tuition, books, and even a stipend for extracurricular activities. Sarah stared at the letter, her hands trembling. Crestwood Academy was a dream, a school she had only ever driven past, its ivy-covered walls seeming to belong to another world. Leo's current school was adequate, but Crestwood offered resources, opportunities, and a quality of education she could only have dreamed of. Next, they tackled the smear campaign. Alexander, with Eleanor's meticulous help, began gathering irrefutable evidence of Victoria's network of gossip columnists and social media accounts. He compiled screenshots, financial transactions, and IP addresses, building a damning case against her. He also prepared a comprehensive statement, backed by verifiable financial records, proving that Sarah's new job was earned on merit and that any gifts she received were from him. Openly given, not secretly manipulated. Tears welled in her eyes. It felt like a miracle. She called the school, half expecting a mistake, but the admissions officer confirmed everything. An anonymous benefactor. The woman explained, her voice warm, was deeply impressed by Leo's records and felt he deserved this opportunity. It's a rare gift, Ms. Miller. Sarah hung up, her mind reeling. An anonymous benefactor, why she racked her brain, trying to think of anyone who knew their circumstances. Anyone who would be so incredibly generous. No one came to mind. It felt like a cosmic reward, a sudden burst of sunshine after years of relentless rain. She attributed it to good karma, a blessing from above, never once suspecting the powerful hand orchestrating it all. Sarah, meanwhile, took a proactive step at her workplace. She requested a meeting with her department head and HR, openly addressing the rumors. She presented her performance reviews, her project successes, and calmly explained her background, emphasizing her dedication and hard work. Her honesty and composure, combined with Alexander's quiet support, he subtly ensured her superiors were aware of her value, quickly dispelled the professional whispers. Alexander, meanwhile, received Eleanor's concise report. Leo Miller accepted to Crestwood Academy. Full scholarship confirmed. Ms. Miller's reaction, profound gratitude. No suspicion of external influence. A small, private smile touched Alexander's lips. This was far more satisfying than any multi-million-dollar deal. He imagined Sarah's relief, the weight lifted from her shoulders, and a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with profit margins. The social attacks were harder to combat directly, but they found strength in unity. They attended events together, projecting an image of unwavering solidarity. Alexander would often keep Sarah close, his hand on her back, his gaze challenging anyone who dared to cast a disparaging look. Sarah, drawing strength from his presence, held her head high, refusing to let the snobbery of Alexander's peers diminish her. Next, Alexander turned his attention to Sarah's grueling work schedule. He knew she worked as an office cleaner in the mornings and a barista in the afternoons, with sporadic data entry work in the evenings. He wanted to alleviate her physical burden, to give her more time with Leo, and to provide her with an income that matched her intelligence and diligence. One particularly venomous socialite, emboldened by Victoria's whispers, attempted to publicly humiliate Sarah at a charity auction. "My dear Sarah," she purred, her voice dripping with condescension. "Such a charming dress. I do hope Alexander didn't have to dip into his petty cash to afford it for you." Through a series of carefully veiled inquiries, Alexander learned that a mid-sized tech company, a subsidiary of Thorne Enterprises that he rarely paid attention to, was looking for a new data management specialist. The role required meticulous attention to detail, strong organizational skills, and a high degree of discretion, qualities he had observed in Sarah. He had Eleanor arrange for the job posting to be subtly highlighted in a local online job board that Sarah was known to frequent. He also ensured that her anonymous application, when it came through, would be given priority. Not because of his influence, but because her qualifications were genuinely impressive. Before Sarah could respond, Alexander stepped forward, his voice cutting through the polite chatter like a sharpened blade. Actually, it's a vintage piece Sarah found herself. She has impeccable taste, something money can't buy. Wouldn't you agree? His gaze, cold and unwavering, met the socialites, silencing her instantly. He then turned to Sarah, a warm, genuine smile on his face, and led her away. It was a small victory, but a powerful one, demonstrating their united front. Sarah stumbled upon the job posting one late evening, scrolling through endless, low-paying data entry gigs. This one, for data management specialist, caught her eye. The description was intriguing. The pay significantly better than anything she'd seen, and the hours were regular, allowing her to be home with Leo in the evenings. It felt almost too good to be true. She applied, cautiously optimistic. Their shared adversity, far from breaking them, forged their bond into something unbreakable. They learned to rely on each other, to trust implicitly. Sarah saw Alexander's fierce protectiveness, his unwavering loyalty, and his deep love for her and Leo. Alexander saw Sarah's incredible resilience, her unshakable integrity, and her quiet strength in the face of relentless attacks. They were a team, a nascent family, standing together against a common enemy. The web of deceit spun by Victoria Sterling was intricate, but it was no match for the combined strength of their love and their unwavering commitment to truth. The stage was set for the final confrontation, where justice, at last, would be served. The interview process was rigorous, but Sarah, despite her lack of formal corporate experience, impressed the hiring managers with her sharp mind, her quick learning ability, and her unwavering dedication. She got the job. Her starting salary was more than double what she earned from her 3 combined jobs. It meant she could finally quit the exhausting cleaning shifts and the demanding barista role. It meant she could afford fresh groceries, pay her rent on time, and maybe, just maybe, start building a small savings cushion. The stage was set. Victoria Sterling, blinded by her own arrogance and jealousy, had pushed too far. She had underestimated the strength of Sarah and Alexander's bond, and the unwavering commitment of a man determined to protect his nascent family. The web of deceit she had spun, intricate as it was about to unravel, caught in the combined force of their love and Alexander's strategic brilliance. When she told Leo the news, his eyes lit up. "Does this mean you won't be so tired all the time?" "Mom," he asked, his small voice filled with hope. The climax began with Alexander's decisive move. He convened an emergency board meeting, a rare occurrence that sent ripples of apprehension through Thorne Enterprises. He presented a meticulously compiled dossier, a damning collection of evidence against Victoria, screenshots of her secret social media accounts, and the gossip columnists she funded, detailed financial transactions linking her to the smear campaign, and even recordings of her subtly manipulating Daniel. The evidence was irrefutable, painting a clear picture of a woman driven by malice and a desperate desire to sabotage his personal life. Sarah pulled him into a tight hug, tears blurring her vision. "Yes, sweetie. It means I'll be home more, and we can finally get that new refrigerator." The board members, initially skeptical, grew increasingly uneasy as Alexander laid out the facts. They were ruthless in business, but Victoria's personal attacks, particularly those involving Daniel, crossed a line. Her actions threatened not just Alexander's reputation, but the stability of the company itself. The room was silent, save for the rustle of papers, as the full extent of Victoria's machinations was exposed. Alexander received another report from Eleanor Ms. Miller, accepted data management specialist position, performance reviews already exceeding expectations, observed significant improvement in her demeanor. He felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He wasn't just observing anymore, he was subtly, yet powerfully, changing her life. Alexander concluded his presentation with a cold, unwavering gaze. Victoria Sterling has not only engaged in a malicious smear campaign against Sarah Miller, a woman who saved my son's life, but she has also actively attempted to destabilize Thorne Enterprises and emotionally manipulate my child. Her actions are a direct threat to my family and to this company's integrity. I believe her immediate removal from all affiliated boards and any future consideration for partnerships is not just warranted, but necessary. But the subtle help didn't stop there. Alexander remembered the worn-out car Sarah drove, a constant source of anxiety for her. Through a network of trusted contacts, he arranged for her car to be randomly selected for a community safety check at a reputable, independent garage. The mechanics, subtly briefed, found a litany of critical issues that made the vehicle unsafe to drive. They then offered her an unbeatable deal on a reliable, late-model used car, citing a special community program for single parents. The cost of the new car, of course, was covered by an anonymous donation to the garage. The decision was swift and unanimous. Victoria Sterling, once a formidable presence in their elite circles, was publicly disgraced. Her family, mortified by the scandal, quickly distanced themselves. Her social standing crumbled, her business ventures faltered, and the very network she had used to spread venom now turned on her, eager to distance themselves from her downfall. Justice, cold and precise, had been served. Sarah was initially frustrated by the news about her old car. It was another unexpected expense she couldn't afford. But when the garage manager, a kind, gruff man, explained the community program and showed her the pristine, low-mileage sedan, she was speechless. It was a miracle. Again. She drove away in the new car, feeling a sense of security she hadn't known in years. No more worrying about breaking down on the highway, no more fearing expensive repairs. Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own confrontation. Eleanor, with Alexander's full support, had arranged a company-wide meeting at Thorne Innovations, where Sarah worked. Alexander, though not present, had ensured the HR department was fully briefed and ready to address any lingering doubts. Sarah, her heart pounding, stood before her colleagues, her head held high. Alexander, observing from a distance, saw her driving the new car, Leo beaming in the passenger seat. He felt a quiet, profound satisfaction. He wasn't doing this for recognition, or even for gratitude. He was doing it because he admired her, because he believed she deserved a chance, and because her genuine kindness had touched something deep within him that he hadn't known existed. He wanted to ease her burdens, to bring a little more light into her demanding life, without ever making her feel indebted. The seeds of connection had been planted, awkward and fragile, but undeniably present. And in the quiet determination of Alexander Thorne, a new chapter of unforeseen encounters was just beginning. A chapter where Sarah's life was subtly, mysteriously improving, and Alexander found a purpose beyond profit. "I know there have been rumors," she began, her voice clear and steady, "about how I came to be in this position. I want to address them directly." She then, with Alexander's prior approval, revealed the full story: how she saved Daniel, how Alexander had discreetly helped her and Leo, and how Victoria had twisted those acts into a malicious narrative. She spoke of her pride, her initial anger at Alexander's secrecy, and their subsequent journey towards honesty and trust. She presented her performance reviews, her project successes, and spoke passionately about her dedication to her work, proving her merit beyond any doubt. Sarah's life had undergone a transformation so profound, it felt almost surreal. Leo was thriving at Crestwood Academy, his bright mind finally stimulated by challenging lessons and enriched by diverse opportunities. Her new job as a data management specialist was fulfilling, offering not only a substantial income, but also a sense of professional purpose she hadn't known since before Leo was born. And the new car. It was more than just transportation. It was freedom, a quiet assurance that she wouldn't be stranded on the side of the road with a tired child after a long day. Her honesty disarmed her colleagues. They saw not a gold digger, but a woman of immense integrity who had been unfairly targeted. The whispers ceased, replaced by murmurs of respect and, for many, genuine admiration. Her department head, a stern but fair woman, publicly commended Sarah's courage and professionalism, solidifying her position and silencing any lingering doubts. The professional smear campaign had been decisively defeated. Yet, amidst this newfound stability, a quiet unease began to stir within her. These blessings, while undeniably wonderful, felt too perfect, too convenient. Scholarships, dream jobs, new cars. They didn't just happen to people like her, not all at once. Anyway, it was like a perfectly orchestrated symphony, but she couldn't see the conductor. With Victoria neutralized and their reputations cleared, Sarah and Alexander's relationship, having weathered the storm, emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. The shared adversity had forged an unbreakable bond, a deep understanding and trust that few couples ever achieved. They had faced the worst of society's judgment and emerged victorious, united. One evening, over takeout Chinese food, Sarah confided in her best friend, Maria. Maria, a no-nonsense paralegal with a healthy dose of cynicism, listened intently, her chopsticks pausing midair as Sarah recounted the string of fortunate events. One crisp autumn evening, under the soft glow of the city lights from his penthouse balcony, Alexander led Sarah out. The air was cool, carrying the scent of distant rain. He turned to her, his piercing blue eyes filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "So, let me get this straight," Maria said, setting down her chopsticks. "First, Leo gets a full ride to a fancy private school out of nowhere. Then, you land a high-paying corporate job you weren't even really qualified for on paper, but somehow nailed the interview. And now, your clunker of a car magically dies and gets replaced by a nearly new sedan through some community program that no one else has ever heard of." "Sarah," he began, his voice a little shaky, a rare display of nerves. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He knelt, not in a grand, theatrical gesture, but with a quiet sincerity that spoke volumes. "You saved my son. You showed me a kindness I didn't know existed. You taught me what true strength and integrity look like. You've brought light and laughter into my life and into Daniel's. You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "When you put it like that, it does sound a bit much." He opened the box. Inside, a simple, elegant diamond ring shimmered, catching the light. "Sarah Miller, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you build a future with me, with Leo, with Daniel, as our family?" Maria leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "A bit much, Sarah. This isn't good karma. This is someone with serious power and resources making things happen for you, someone who doesn't want to be known." She paused, then her gaze sharpened further. "And who's the only person you've recently encountered with that kind of power?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, hot and joyful. This wasn't about wealth or status, it was about love, respect, and a future she had once only dreamed of. She saw the hope, the vulnerability, and the deep love in his eyes. Sarah's breath hitched. Alexander Thorne. The thought had flickered at the edges of her mind, a tiny, unsettling spark, but she had quickly extinguished it. It felt too outlandish, too much like a fairy tale, and frankly, too much like charity. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Alexander. 1,000 times. Yes, don't be ridiculous." "Maria," Sarah said, trying to sound dismissive, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why would he do something like that? He's a billionaire. He barely knows me." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose, pulling her into a fierce, tender embrace. The city lights blurred around them, but all she saw was his face. All she felt was the warmth of his arms. "He barely knows you," Maria scoffed. "Sarah, you saved his son's life. The son of a reclusive CEO who probably has more money than God. Do you really think a man like that, who can buy anything and anyone, would just let that go? Especially after you refused his money." Leo and Daniel, who had been quietly playing in the living room, rushed out onto the balcony. Drawn by the emotional scene, Leo, seeing his mom crying happy tears, looked at Alexander, then at the ring. A wide grin spread across his face. "Does this mean we're going to be brothers?" "Daniel?" Sarah's stomach tightened. Maria's words, blunt and logical, resonated with an uncomfortable truth. Her refusal of his reward at the beach, an act of fierce pride, suddenly felt like it might have backfired, drawing his attention rather than deterring it. The idea that Alexander Thorne was orchestrating her life, however benevolently, was deeply unsettling. It felt like a violation of her independence, a subtle form of control. Daniel, his own face alight with excitement, nodded vigorously. "Yes, we're going to be a real family." "But why anonymously?" Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Maria. "Why go through all this trouble?" The two boys hugged, their innocent joy a perfect counterpoint to the profound moment between their parents. Alexander pulled them both into the embrace, a complete family, finally, standing together under the vast, indifferent city sky. Leo thrived at Crestwood, excelling academically and socially, his confidence soaring. Daniel, now free from Victoria's insidious influence, blossomed, finding a true brother and a loving maternal figure in Sarah. Their home, once a lonely mansion, was now filled with laughter, warmth, and the joyful chaos of two growing boys. Maria shrugged. Maybe he respects your pride. Maybe he doesn't want you to feel indebted. Or maybe, she added, a cynical glint in her eye, he has other motives. Rich men don't do things for free. Sarah, especially not for single moms they've just met. The journey had been arduous, fraught with secrets, betrayals, and relentless attacks. But through it all, Sarah and Alexander had stood together, their love a beacon in the storm. A single act of bravery, a simple kindness, had set in motion a chain of events that defied all expectations, leading to a love story that was as unexpected as it was fated. Justice had been served, love had triumphed, and a new, extraordinary family had been forged in the crucible of adversity. The words stung. Sarah knew Maria meant well, but the implication that she was being manipulated, or that her good fortune came with strings attached, chafed at her fierce independence. She had fought tooth and nail for every single thing in her life. The idea that her recent successes were not entirely her own doing, but rather the result of a powerful man's unseen hand, was a bitter pill to swallow. It felt like her hard-won dignity was being subtly undermined. Years melted into a tapestry of shared moments, each thread woven with love, laughter, and the quiet strength forged in adversity. The grand penthouse, once a symbol of Alexander's solitary wealth, transformed into a vibrant, bustling home, filled with the joyful chaos of two growing boys and the warmth of a family truly united. Sarah, now Alexander's wife, moved through their lives with a grace born of contentment, her tired eyes replaced by a radiant glow, her quiet dignity now amplified by profound happiness. Meanwhile, in his opulent penthouse office, Alexander Thorne was grappling with his own internal conflicts. His discreet acts of benevolence had brought him a quiet satisfaction, a sense of purpose beyond the relentless pursuit of profit. He found himself thinking of Sarah constantly, her resilience, her genuine smile, the way she fiercely protected Leo. His admiration had deepened into something undeniably romantic, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, if ever. Leo, flourishing at Crestwood Academy, became a testament to the power of opportunity and unwavering support. He excelled not just academically, but socially, his natural curiosity and kindness drawing friends to him. He embraced Daniel as the brother he had always longed for, their bond deepening with each shared adventure, each whispered secret. From early morning soccer practices to late-night video game sessions, their brotherhood was a constant source of joy and a living embodiment of the unexpected family they had become. But he was also a man of immense caution and control. He knew the optics of his actions. A billionaire CEO secretly showering a single mother with gifts after she saved his son. It reeked of obligation, of a power imbalance, of something transactional. He didn't want Sarah to feel like a project, or worse, like a charity case. He genuinely cared for her. But how could he bridge the chasm between their worlds without destroying the very qualities he admired in her? Daniel, once a quiet, somewhat anxious child, blossomed under Sarah's loving, maternal presence. Her warmth and unwavering support helped him shed the lingering anxieties planted by Victoria, replacing them with confidence and a sense of belonging. He adored Sarah, seeing her not just as his father's wife, but as a true mother figure, a source of comfort and unconditional love. He thrived on the lively energy Leo brought into his life, finding in his new brother a playmate, a confidant, and a constant companion. He paced his office, the city lights twinkling far below like scattered diamonds. He had always been in control, always had a clear objective. But Sarah Miller was different. She defied his usual strategies. He wanted her to be happy, to thrive, to have the opportunities she deserved. But he also wanted to be honest with her, to confess his role, and to explore the growing feelings that stirred within him. The thought of her reaction, her fierce pride, made him hesitate. Would she see his actions as a heartfelt gesture or as an arrogant display of power? Alexander, the formidable CEO, found a profound peace he had never known. The relentless pursuit of profit, while still a part of his life, no longer consumed him. He discovered a deeper purpose in nurturing his family, in witnessing the happiness he had helped create. He saw Sarah's quiet strength every day, her unwavering integrity continuing to inspire him. Their relationship, built on the ashes of secrecy and the fire of confrontation, was a testament to honesty and resilience. He had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in billions, but in the laughter that echoed through his home, the loving touch of his wife, and the joyful chaos of his sons. He thought of Daniel, now fully recovered and back home, often asking about Leo's mom. Daniel's innocent questions about Sarah only intensified Alexander's internal struggle. He wanted to be a good example for his son, to show him genuine connection, not just calculated generosity. But how could he confess without making Sarah feel like her independence was compromised? Their story became a quiet legend in their circles, a whispered tale of how a single act of bravery could rewrite destinies. Sarah continued her work as a data management specialist at Thorne Innovations, excelling in her role, her career flourishing on her own merit, a quiet defiance to the initial whispers. She also became involved in various community initiatives, particularly those supporting single mothers and providing educational opportunities for underprivileged children, drawing on her own experiences to make a tangible difference. He knew Maria's cynicism was a common perception. Rich men don't do things for free. The phrase echoed in his mind, a painful reminder of the world he inhabited, a world that would inevitably cast a shadow over his intentions. He wasn't some playboy CEO looking for a new conquest. He was a man profoundly moved by a woman's character, a man who found himself falling for her. But how could he convince her of that? Especially after all his carefully constructed anonymity. The memory of Victoria Sterling faded into insignificance, a distant, bitter echo. Her downfall served as a stark reminder that malice, however cunning, ultimately crumbles in the face of genuine connection and unwavering truth. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through the quiet triumph of good over ill intent. The more he thought about it, the more he realized the precariousness of his position. His actions, though well-intentioned, could easily be misinterpreted. He had given her gifts, yes, but he had also withheld the truth. The walls of doubt, both within Sarah and within himself, were slowly rising. He knew a confrontation was inevitable. The truth, however uncomfortable, would have to come out. And when it did, he could only hope that the genuine feelings that had driven his actions would somehow shine through the shadow of his wealth and his carefully guarded secrets. The journey had been arduous, fraught with secrets, betrayals, and relentless attacks. But through it all, Sarah and Alexander had stood together, their love a beacon in the storm. A single act of bravery on a crowded beach, a simple kindness offered without expectation, had set in motion a chain of events that defied all expectations, leading to a love story that was as unexpected as it was fated. It was a testament to the idea that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in grand gestures or vast fortunes, but in the quiet courage of a single mother, and the profound connection that blossoms when two souls, from vastly different worlds, find their way home to each other. Their life together was a beautiful, ongoing symphony, a harmonious blend of strength, compassion, and an enduring love that defied all odds. The quiet unease that had settled over Sarah, fueled by Maria's blunt observations, grew with each passing day. The blessings in her life felt less like miracles and more like carefully placed chess pieces. She found herself scrutinizing Alexander during their chance encounters, searching for a tell, a hint of the puppet master behind the curtain. He remained outwardly composed, his blue eyes holding a warmth she hadn't seen in him before, a genuine interest that warred with her growing suspicion. She wanted to believe it was all just incredible luck, but the logical part of her, honed by years of navigating a harsh reality, screamed otherwise. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one, and while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Meanwhile, Alexander continued his delicate dance. He saw the flicker of doubt in Sarah's eyes, the subtle tension in her shoulders when he appeared unexpectedly. He knew his carefully constructed anonymity was unraveling, and the impending confrontation loomed large. His feelings for her had deepened, becoming undeniable. He wasn't just admiring her from afar, he was falling for her. A sensation both exhilarating and terrifying for a man who had built his life on emotional detachment. He desperately wanted to confess, to lay bare his intentions. But the fear of her rejection, of seeing that fierce pride turn to anger held him back.